Have you ever noticed how some people just vanish? Not in the dramatic movie-type way, but quietly. One day they're at every gathering, posting online, chiming in on group chats, full of life and curiosity. And then, silence. You don't see them at parties anymore. They stop caring about the latest gossip, and suddenly it feels like they've stepped off the stage of society altogether. Almost like they chose to fade into the background, but not because they're broken, because they've seen something most people haven't. It's strange, isn't it? We're used to thinking that those who go missing from the crowd are struggling or lost, but often it's the opposite. These are the ones who ask deeper questions, who refuse to settle for surface-level living. They searched for truth. They wanted more than the shallow comfort of doing what everyone else does. And when they realized that most of the world runs on noise, distraction, and performance, they started walking a different path. Imagine someone who used to love being the center of attention at a family dinner. But one day they wake up and see how the conversations never change. Who got a promotion, who bought what, who disagrees with who, and suddenly it feels heavy. They don't storm out or make a scene. They just smile, nod, and eventually stop showing up as often. Not because they don't love their family, but because they crave peace more than pointless repetition. That's the quiet shift happening with spiritually awake people. They're not rejecting life. They're not running away. They're simply choosing not to waste themselves in places that no longer feed their soul. And if you look closely, you'll realize they haven't disappeared at all. They've just stepped into a different kind of presence. The noise of the world. Look around you for a moment. Every second, something is demanding your attention. Notifications buzzing, messages piling up, headlines screaming for clicks, endless scrolling that leaves you more drained than inspired. Even when you try to sit in silence, the world sneaks in through the glow of a screen or the endless hum of background chatter. This is the environment most people live in, completely immersed in noise. And here's the irony. The more connected we become, the less connected we actually feel. Most people don't notice this because the noise has become normal. It's like living next to a busy highway. At first, the sound of cars rushing by is unbearable, but give it enough time and your brain just tunes it out. You stop noticing. The problem is, just because you don't notice doesn't mean it isn't affecting you. The constant flood of voices, opinions, and arguments slowly drowns out your own inner voice. That's why silence feels so foreign to many people. They've forgotten what their own mind actually sounds like. Spiritually awake people are the ones who start to notice the damage. They see how much of society runs on noise, arguments over politics, gossip about celebrities, the need to constantly post updates just to feel seen, and they realize something powerful. None of this noise actually matters. At least not in the way we've been taught to believe. Silence, instead of being empty, becomes full. It becomes sanity. Think about it like going to the gym. If your body is constantly stressed, eating junk food, never resting, you can't expect it to be strong or healthy. Your mind is no different. If it's constantly fed with endless noise and drama, how can it possibly feel balanced? That's why awake people step back. They learn to treat silence like a workout for the soul, a discipline that builds strength. No one can see, but everyone can feel. Here's the thing. Silence is not just the absence of sound, it's the presence of clarity. In silence, your thoughts stop racing long enough for you to actually hear yourself. In silence, you notice things you've ignored for years. The tension in your body, the emotions you've buried, the ideas you've been too busy to explore. That's why spiritually awake people crave it. Because silence doesn't numb you, it wakes you up. And yet society is terrified of silence. Notice how quickly people reach for their phones when a conversation pauses, or how uncomfortable they get when no one is speaking in a room. The world teaches us that silence is awkward, boring, or even lonely. But the spiritually awake see it differently. Silence is not loneliness, it's alignment. It's where you stop being pulled in 100 directions and finally return to yourself. This is why spiritually awake people disappear from noisy spaces. They don't abandon society because they hate it. They step away because they refuse to be drowned by it. They'd rather walk in silence than be lost in chaos. And when you see someone who's chosen silence over noise, understand this: they're not running from life. They're finally hearing it clearly, maybe for the very first time. Outgrowing the crowd. There comes a point in life when you realize that fitting in isn't the same as belonging. At first, most of us want to be accepted, to be part of the group, to laugh at the same jokes and follow the same trends. And for a while it feels good, it feels safe. But spiritually awake people begin to notice the hidden cost. To stay inside the crowd, you often have to shrink yourself down, hide your real thoughts, soften your voice, ignore your intuition, and pretend to care about things that don't actually matter to you. It's like folding a large painting just to fit it into a small frame. You fit, yes, but only because you cut off the best parts of yourself. Awake people see this clearly. They notice how conversations are built more around appearances than truth. How choices are often made not because they feel right, but because that's what everyone else is doing. And deep down they realize they can't keep bending themselves just to stay comfortable in the group. So instead of arguing or trying to change others, they quietly walk away. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. Think about it like school. Remember how in high school there was always a certain style of clothing or music that defined what was cool? Most people followed it, even if they didn't really love it. But eventually you outgrow that phase. You stop listening to music just because it's trending, and you start listening to what actually resonates with you. Spiritually awake people experience the same shift, but on a much bigger scale. They outgrow the crowd's rules for life. When they choose to step back, it doesn't mean they don't love people. It means they've realized that real growth often happens outside the herd. The crowd moves in circles, repeating the same patterns, clinging to comfort zones, but growth asks you to stretch beyond that, to take risks, to think differently, to question what you've been told. And the crowd rarely supports that. If anything, it resists it. Imagine you've been going to the gym with a group of friends for years. At first, it's fun, you're all in it together. But one day you decide you want to take your training more seriously. You stop skipping leg day. You clean up your diet and you start pushing harder. Suddenly, those same friends tease you for being too intense. You haven't changed in a bad way, you've just outgrown the casual version of fitness. The same thing happens when someone becomes spiritually awake. Their growth feels like a threat to those who are still comfortable in sameness. This is why walking away becomes necessary. Not because the crowd is bad, but because staying with them requires you to play small. And awake people realize that shrinking down doesn't serve anyone, not themselves, not the world, not even the crowd they're trying to please. By stepping back, they make space to expand into their full self without apology. It's not a loud rebellion. It's not a dramatic goodbye. It's a quiet departure. One day you look around and realize you don't belong in the same rooms anymore. And instead of forcing yourself to fit, you choose to walk towards something larger, something that doesn't ask you to fold yourself up just to stay inside. Energy is currency. One of the biggest realizations spiritually awake people come to is this: energy works exactly like money. Every thought, every conversation, every action is a kind of transaction. You're either investing in something that grows, or you're throwing your resources into a black hole that gives nothing back. Once this truth clicks, they can't unsee it. Just like you wouldn't keep handing out $100 bills to someone who never pays you back, they stop handing out their time and energy to people, places, and situations that only drain them. Think about it. Most of us treat energy like it's infinite. We say yes to every invitation. We answer every call. We scroll endlessly, even when we're exhausted. We stay in conversations that leave us heavy instead of inspired. If you treated your bank account like that, you'd go broke in weeks. Yet so many people go energetically bankrupt without realizing it, tired, anxious, unmotivated, because they've spent all their energy in the wrong places. Spiritually awake people become hyper-aware of this. They start asking, what am I really getting back from this exchange? If spending an hour gossiping leaves them feeling empty, they stop showing up to those circles. If being around certain people feels like carrying a backpack of rocks, they put the backpack down, not out of cruelty, but out of wisdom. They know their energy is precious, and they want to use it in ways that actually create growth. It's like going to the gym. Imagine working out hard for months, but every night you go home and eat a massive fast food meal that cancels out your progress. Eventually you'd realize, I'm burning energy for nothing. Spiritually awake people feel the same way about relationships and environments. Why pour effort into something that undoes your progress the moment you walk away? Another example. Tipping. You wouldn't tip a waiter who ignored you, got your order wrong, and made you feel unwelcome. You tip because someone gave you value, because they served you well. Spiritually awake people treat their energy the same way. They give generously when something feels meaningful, when it brings joy, when it adds to their life. But when the service is bad, when the exchange leaves them drained, they stop tipping with their attention, their time, and their emotional effort. And here's what makes this shift so powerful. Once you stop wasting energy, you realize how much more alive you feel. You start to see that your creativity, your peace of mind, your sense of purpose, all of it depends on how wisely you spend your inner currency. Protecting your energy isn't selfish. It's the only way to live authentically. Because when you're constantly depleted, you can't give your best to anyone, not even yourself. That's why spiritually awake people quietly disappear from draining spaces. They understand something most people ignore. You don't just run out of hours in a day, you run out of energy. And once it's gone, no amount of scrolling, gossip, or proving yourself to the wrong people will give it back. So they choose wisely. They invest in silence, in purpose, in relationships that uplift, in work that matters. Because unlike money, you can't earn energy back tomorrow. You only get what you protect today. Shallow conversations feel heavy. There's a moment in every spiritually awake person's journey where they realize something has shifted. The conversations that used to keep them entertained suddenly feel flat. It's not that they've become antisocial, it's that their appetite has changed. Once you've tasted depth, real, soul-stirring connection, small talk feels like chewing cardboard. It fills the space, but it doesn't nourish. Most of society runs on small talk. How's the weather? Did you see what so-and-so posted? Can you believe what's happening on the news? On the surface, these exchanges keep things flowing. But for someone who has become awake, the weight of these conversations feels heavier than silence. Because they're not just exchanging words, they're exchanging energy. And energy wants meaning. Imagine eating at a buffet where the tables are full of chips, candy, and soda. At first you might enjoy it. Sweet, salty, fast satisfaction. But after a while your body craves something real, something nourishing. A salad, some fresh fruit, a meal that actually strengthens you instead of leaving you bloated. Spiritually awake people experience the same craving in conversations. They've tasted truth. They've felt the richness of vulnerability. They've connected to ideas that expand their mind. So when they're handed gossip or idle chatter, it feels like junk food. Sure, you can swallow it, but why would you when you know what real nourishment feels like? This doesn't mean awake people judge others. They understand that not everyone is in the same place, but they also know they can't fake interest in things that no longer resonate. Pretending feels heavier than honesty. That's why you'll often see them sitting quietly at gatherings, smiling politely, but not fully engaging. To outsiders, it may seem like they're distant or detached. In reality, they're simply protecting their energy from being wasted on conversations that drain instead of uplift. Take family dinners, for example. Maybe the talk always circles around who bought a new car, which cousin is failing school, or what the neighbors are doing. Spiritually awake people love their family, but they can't help but feel disconnected when the focus is always on comparison or judgment. Instead of arguing or forcing deeper topics, they quietly withdraw. They might sit in the corner with a book, help with the dishes, or just listen without saying much, because they'd rather conserve their energy than pour it into a conversation that leaves them empty. Another comparison is the gym. If you've ever committed to training seriously, you know the frustration of talking about fitness with people who only want shortcuts. They complain about not losing weight but refuse to change their habits. After a while, you realize this isn't a real exchange of ideas, it's just noise. So you stop trying to convince them and you save your breath for people who are truly interested in growth. Spiritually awake people treat conversations the same way. Depth doesn't always mean talking about philosophy or the mysteries of the universe. Sometimes depth is just honesty. It's someone admitting they're struggling, someone sharing a dream, someone asking a question that matters. That's what awake people crave. Conversations that are alive, conversations that challenge, heal, or inspire. Anything less feels like cardboard, flat, tasteless, and not worth the effort of chewing. This is why silence becomes their friend. Because silence, at least, is honest. It doesn't pretend to be something it's not. And for someone who has tasted depth, silence is always better than pretending to care about what doesn't matter. Example: the gym parallel. Imagine this. You decide to make a change in your life and commit to the gym. At first, your friends cheer you on. They like the idea of you getting healthier, stronger, more focused. But then something shifts. You start going every day even when it's inconvenient. You skip late-night hangouts because you need to wake up early. You turn down fast food because you're focused on nutrition. Suddenly the same people who once encouraged you begin to tease you. Come on, one workout won't matter. Why are you so obsessed? They don't mean harm, but they don't understand. At first, you try explaining. You tell them about discipline, about how good you feel, about the progress you're seeing. You hope they'll get it, maybe even join you. But most of them don't. Some laugh it off. Others roll their eyes. And eventually you realize something important. Not everyone is supposed to understand your journey. Your commitment isn't meant to make sense to those who haven't chosen the same path. Spiritually awake people experience this exact dynamic, only it's not about the gym, it's about growth. When they start choosing silence over drama, peace over chaos, depth over small talk, the crowd doesn't get it. Friends might say, "Why don't you come out anymore?" Family might think they're distant. Society calls them antisocial, but in reality, they're just committed to their inner discipline the way an athlete is committed to training. Think of it like strength training. Every rep looks repetitive and boring to an outsider, but to the one lifting the weight, it's building something invisible that slowly becomes visible. Strength, endurance, transformation. Spiritually awake people are lifting weights every day, choosing patience instead of anger, choosing stillness instead of noise, choosing truth instead of appearances. To the crowd it looks unnecessary or even extreme, but to them it's the only way to grow. Here's the tricky part. Discipline creates distance. Just as the gym goer eventually stops explaining why they'd rather rest early than party late, awake people stop explaining why they'd rather sit in meditation than chase the latest trend. It's not arrogance. It's simply exhaustion from trying to justify something others aren't ready to understand. And here's where the parallel gets even sharper. Over time, your body changes from the gym. You become stronger, leaner, more confident. The friends who once teased you start noticing the results. Some may even come to you for advice. The same thing happens spiritually. At first, your silence and withdrawal are mocked or misunderstood. But later, people begin to notice your peace, your clarity, your unshakable presence. They may not say it outright, but they see the results of your discipline. The gym teaches you that growth is lonely. Most people want quick results, not long-term effort. Spiritual growth is no different. Most want shortcuts to happiness, not the discipline of facing their inner world. That's why spiritually awake people quietly disappear. They're in training. They're building something that can't be explained in casual conversations. Eventually, just like the gym goer who no longer wastes breath convincing friends why they train, spiritually awake people stop defending their choices. They let their results, their calmness, their wisdom, their alignment speak for them, and by then they don't need the crowd's understanding anymore, because real growth, whether in the gym or in the soul, has always been a solo commitment first. Trust issues with society. One of the most unsettling realizations spiritually awake people face is that society often rewards the mask, not the face. It rewards appearances, status symbols, polished images, carefully curated success stories over authenticity. And when you see this clearly, it changes the way you move through the world. Not because you suddenly hate society, but because you stop trusting it in the same way. Think about it. The world praises people for looking busy rather than actually being productive. It values how many followers you have, not the depth of your message. It celebrates the person who looks happy in photos, even if behind the scenes they're falling apart. From school to workplaces to social media, the pattern is the same: appearance over truth. And when you're awake, you can't unsee the emptiness in that system. It's like walking into a restaurant where everything looks perfect. The decor, the lighting, the Instagram-worthy menu. But when the food arrives, it's tasteless. Sure, it photographs well, but it doesn't nourish you. Spiritually awake people realize society often serves life the same way, beautifully packaged but lacking substance. And once you've tasted authenticity, you lose the appetite for appearances. This is where the trust issue comes in. They stop trusting the idea that success equals wealth alone. They stop trusting the belief that popularity equals worth. They stop trusting that the loudest voices are the ones telling the truth. And instead of fighting every system, they quietly step away from it. Not because they're bitter, but because they're clear. They understand the game and they choose not to play it. Take the workplace as an example. In many offices, promotions aren't always given to the hardest worker, but to the person who looks the part, stays late for appearances, talks confidently in meetings, plays politics better than anyone else. The spiritually awake person sees this and realizes, if I want to keep my peace, I can't keep investing all my energy here. It's not about quitting life, It's about withdrawing their trust from systems that don't value what's real. Family dynamics can reveal the same truth. Maybe someone in the family gets constant praise because they bought a new car or moved into a bigger house, while another family member who is kind, supportive, and genuine goes unnoticed. When you're awake, you see how misplaced the rewards are. You recognize that kindness, wisdom, and authenticity often get overshadowed by flashy achievements, and slowly you stop expecting recognition from others. This withdrawal isn't fueled by anger. In fact, it's the opposite. It comes with a strange peace, because once you stop expecting society to reward authenticity, you free yourself from disappointment. You stop waiting for applause that was never meant for you. You realize that true fulfillment can't be given by a system built on appearances. It can only be found within. It's similar to taking off a pair of tinted glasses. Once you see clearly, you can't go back to pretending. Spiritually awake people understand that authenticity will rarely be the loudest in the room, but it will always be the truest. And they'd rather live in truth quietly than thrive in a lie loudly. That clarity becomes their compass. So they withdraw. Not because they're antisocial, not because they're bitter, but because they know where real value lies. And once you know that, you can't keep pretending otherwise. You simply choose silence over noise, clarity over appearances, and authenticity over the mask. That choice is freedom. Protecting inner peace. There comes a point in life when you experience something so profound, so nourishing, that you can never go back to the way things were. For spiritually awake people, that something is peace. Not the temporary calm that comes from a weekend off or a vacation, but a deep, steady inner peace that feels like home. And once they've tasted it, everything else changes. Chaos, drama, and negativity no longer feel normal, they feel toxic. Peace becomes the priority. And here's the truth: you can't bargain with it. Most people trade their peace away every single day without even realizing it. They sacrifice it for arguments that don't matter, for jobs that drain them, for relationships built on tension, or for the endless pull of social media. It's like spending your health for pennies, constantly paying out without realizing the cost. Spiritually awake people, however, come to see peace as priceless. It's not negotiable. It's not something they'll give up just to keep someone else comfortable. Think of it like being allergic to something. Once you realize a certain food makes you sick, you stop eating it, no matter how good it smells, no matter how many other people are enjoying it. Chaos is the same for the awake person. Once they've felt what it's like to live in peace, chaos feels like poison. It might look tempting in the form of drama, quick thrills, or attention, but deep down they know it's not worth the cost. Family gatherings can show this clearly. Maybe everyone else enjoys debating politics at the dinner table, voices raised, egos clashing. In the past, the awake person might have joined in, even fought to prove a point, but now they excuse themselves. They'd rather wash the dishes in the kitchen alone than sit in a storm that robs them of peace. To some, this looks like avoidance, but to them it's protection, because peace isn't weakness, it's strength guarded wisely. The same shift happens in friendships. If a friend constantly calls just to complain, criticize, or stir up gossip, the awake person begins to pull back, not out of cruelty, but out of self-respect. They recognize that every conversation is an exchange, and peace is too valuable to be traded for negativity. Protecting inner peace often means setting boundaries that others don't understand, and that's okay. Because the awake person no longer needs everyone's approval, they only need alignment with themselves. Think of peace like a clean glass of water. Once you've tasted it, you'll never again be satisfied with muddy water, no matter how many people tell you it's normal. Spiritually awake people will walk away from entire environments just to keep their water clean. Jobs, relationships, and habits are all filtered through one question: does this protect my peace or poison it? And here's the powerful part. When peace becomes your priority, life gets simpler. Decisions become clearer. You no longer chase every opportunity, engage in every argument, or please every person. You learn to say no without guilt, to leave without anger, and to stand alone without fear. That's the real freedom peace gives you. So when spiritually awake people disappear from society, it's not that they've given up on life. It's that they've discovered the true currency of living peace. And once you know how it feels, you'll do whatever it takes to guard it. Because peace isn't just a luxury, it's survival. Losing the taste for competition. There's a stage in life where competition feels thrilling. You want to be the best student in class, the sharpest in meetings, the one who makes the biggest impression. You argue to win, not to understand. You work hard not just to succeed but to be seen succeeding. For a while that game feels like purpose. But spiritually awake people eventually hit a turning point. They start asking, what exactly am I competing for? And who am I trying to impress? When those questions sink in, the thrill of competition fades. Winning an argument no longer feels like victory. It feels like wasted energy. Bragging about success no longer feels like joy. It feels hollow, like trying to fill a bottomless cup. Once you realize that external validation can't fill the inner void, competition starts to lose its flavor. It's like eating candy for dinner. At first, it's sweet and exciting, but the more you consume, the more you feel sick, heavy, and unsatisfied. That's what competition feels like after you've tasted inner growth. The sugar rush of beating someone else or proving your worth just doesn't compare to the nourishment of living in alignment with yourself. Consider workplace culture. Promotions often go to those who play the political game, who outshine others, who compete to be noticed. Spiritually awake people see this and recognize the trap. They realize that climbing ladders for recognition often means stepping on values, relationships, or even your own well-being, and they decide it's not worth the climb. Instead of running faster in the rat race, they quietly step off the track. Even in relationships, the need to compete fades. Some couples constantly keep score. Who gives more, who sacrifices more, who wins the argument? Awake people stop playing this game. They understand that true connection isn't about one person winning, it's about both people growing. That shift can make them seem less fiery, less eager to prove themselves. But in reality, they've simply lost the taste for battles that don't matter. Think about sports as an example. For kids, winning a game feels like the ultimate high. But as you grow older, you realize the game itself, the teamwork, the exercise, the joy of playing, is the real reward. Spiritually awake, people feel the same about life. They stop chasing trophies and start enjoying the play. Competition shrinks and fulfillment expands. This doesn't mean they become lazy or lack ambition. On the contrary, they often work harder than before, but their work isn't driven by comparison. It's driven by purpose. They're not asking, how can I beat others? They're asking, how can I become more of myself? That's a very different fuel source. It doesn't drain you, it sustains you. The irony is, when you stop competing, you often excel more naturally, because your energy is no longer tied up in proving yourself. It's free to flow into creation, growth, and mastery. And while others are distracted by winning or losing, you're busy building a life that doesn't need scoreboards. That's why spiritually awake people quietly disappear from competitive spaces. They no longer need to be the loudest voice, the richest person, or the smartest in the room. They understand that true success isn't about standing above others, it's about standing firmly in yourself. And once you taste that, competition feels less like progress and more like poison dressed as ambition. Example: family dynamics. Picture this: a family gathering. The table is full of food. The house is loud with laughter and chatter, and everything feels warm until the conversations take a turn. Suddenly, someone makes a comment about politics, religion, money, or even just who's raising their kids the right way. Within minutes, voices rise, people cut each other off, and what started as a gathering of love shifts into a battlefield of egos. Everyone is talking, but almost no one is listening. If you've been in that kind of moment, you know how exhausting it feels. You love these people. They're family, but the energy in the room becomes heavy. Instead of connection, it turns into a competition. Who can speak louder? Who can prove they're right? Who can get the last word? And when you're awake, when you've tasted peace, these arguments stop feeling like debates and start feeling like poison. At first, you might try to join in. You want to explain your perspective, maybe even shine a light of reason on the situation. But eventually you realize the truth. Most of these conversations aren't about truth at all. They're about pride. People aren't debating to grow, they're debating to win. And once you see that, you stop showing up in the same way. Spiritually awake. People learn to withdraw from these battles quietly. Not because they don't care, but because they care too much about protecting their peace. They'd rather excuse themselves to the kitchen, play with the kids, or simply sit back and observe. They don't need to prove their wisdom by overpowering others. They prove it by conserving their energy. This is a mirror of how they interact with society at large. Society, much like family, is always arguing about who's right. Scroll through social media, turn on the news, or walk into a coffee shop, everywhere, people are divided. Each side convinced they've got the truth. It's the same dynamic as a family dinner, just on a larger scale. And awake people respond to society the same way they respond to those family arguments, by stepping out of the debate. Imagine someone at the dinner table who keeps trying to explain, keeps raising their voice, keeps throwing logic into the fire. By the end of the night, they're drained, frustrated, and nothing has changed. Meanwhile, the person who stayed quiet, who protected their peace, leaves with energy still intact. That's the spiritually awake approach to society. They've learned that endless arguments rarely shift anything, but silence can. Silence is power. Silence is clarity. Think of it this way: in a family, love isn't proven by winning arguments. It's proven by being present, by showing kindness, by respecting boundaries. Spiritually awake, people take this truth and apply it everywhere. They no longer confuse winning with connection. They no longer mistake being right for being wise. They understand that sometimes the strongest choice is to simply walk away from the noise. And while others may see their withdrawal as detachment, it's actually the opposite. It's intentional love. It's saying, I won't let this chaos define me, but I'll still hold space for the people I care about. That's why their presence often feels calm, even if they don't say much. They become the quiet anchor in a room full of storms. So when awake people disappear from society's endless debates, it's not a rejection of humanity. It's the same choice you'd make at a family dinner when everyone's shouting over each other. You don't stop loving them, you just stop wasting yourself in battles that can't be won. A quiet revolution. Here's the twist. Most people don't see when spiritually awake people disappear. It isn't an act of surrender. It isn't them giving up on life, society, or even connection. It's something far more powerful. It's the beginning of a quiet revolution. From the outside, it might look like retreat, like withdrawal, like stepping away from the stage. But inside, something extraordinary is happening. Think about a seed buried in the soil. To the outside world, it looks like nothing is happening. The surface is quiet, empty, still. But beneath, the seed is breaking open, roots are spreading, and life is preparing to burst through. Spiritually awake people live that same process. When they step back, they're not fading, they're rooting, they're building depth within themselves, preparing to grow in ways society can't always measure or see. Most of society celebrates noise and visibility. It praises the person who's always posting, always hustling, always proving they exist through achievements and attention. But the awake knows something different. True transformation rarely happens in the spotlight. It happens in solitude. It happens when the noise fades, when distractions fall away, when you have the courage to look inward instead of constantly performing outward. This quiet revolution is deeply intentional. They are rebuilding themselves piece by piece, how they think, what they value, how they spend their days. They're decluttering their inner world the same way someone might declutter their home. Just like you wouldn't keep broken furniture or clothes that no longer fit, they stop carrying beliefs, habits, and relationships that don't align with their deeper self. Take an example from the gym. If someone disappears from the group for a few months, people might assume they quit. But then they return, stronger, leaner, more focused. What happened? They didn't quit. They trained in silence. They invested in the unseen hours, the private discipline, the lonely consistency that eventually transformed their body. Spiritually awake people are doing the same, but with their soul. This kind of revolution doesn't look glamorous. You won't always see the posts, the selfies, the constant updates. Instead, you'll notice subtle changes, the way they carry themselves, the calm in their voice, the clarity in their eyes. They're not fighting the old world with noise. They're creating a new one by living differently. And make no mistake, this is a revolution. Because when one person chooses peace over chaos, authenticity over performance, purpose over approval, it sends ripples outward. Their quiet presence challenges others without a word. It makes people wonder, why are they so calm? Why don't they get pulled into the drama? What do they know that I don't? That's how the quiet spreads, not through shouting, but through example. Not through forcing, but through living. These people become like lighthouses, silent, steady, unmoving, yet guiding anyone who dares to look up. So disappearing isn't escape, it's construction. It's not rejection, it's preparation. Spiritually awake people are building a life that doesn't need constant validation, a soul that doesn't need external applause, and a peace that no argument can shatter. And one day, when they return to the stage, or even if they never do, the difference will be undeniable. The revolution they sparked won't be remembered for noise. It'll be remembered for the quiet strength that changed everything. Engagement cue. What about you? Have you ever felt the urge to just step back from the constant noise of society? To log off for a while, to stop answering calls, to skip the parties, and instead just sit in silence with yourself? It's an experience more common than people admit, but few talk about openly. And that's what makes this question powerful. It isn't just about them, it's about you. Think about how much noise fills your life daily. Notifications buzzing every few seconds, news headlines designed to spark outrage, people debating endlessly about politics, celebrities, or the latest viral drama. Even simple conversations sometimes feel like rehearsed scripts instead of genuine connections. In a world this loud, the natural instinct isn't always to fight harder. Sometimes it's to step back, to breathe, to remember who you are without all the static. Maybe you've felt it during a social event where everyone else seemed engaged, but you were silently wondering, What's the point of all this? Maybe you felt it scrolling endlessly, realizing you weren't learning, connecting, or growing, just draining your energy into a void. Or maybe it was more dramatic, like a season of life where you pulled away from everyone and everything, not because you hated the world, but because you needed space to heal, reset, or rebuild. That's the very space. Spiritually awake people choose to live in more intentionally. For them, it's not an occasional break, it's a way of life. But here's the thing. You don't have to be fully awake to recognize the exhaustion that comes with society's endless noise. Most people feel it at some point. The only difference is whether you act on that instinct or drown it out with more distraction. So here's where you come in. I want to know, have you ever felt that pull to withdraw? Not in a way that's negative, but in a way that felt like self-protection. Like your soul whispering, you need this. Did you listen to that whisper? Or did you push it aside because you didn't want to seem strange, antisocial, or different? Your answer matters because these experiences are more universal than we think. And when you share your story, even if it's small, you give someone else permission to admit they've felt the same. That's how conversations shift from surface level to meaningful. That's how community is built, not through noise, but through honesty. Imagine scrolling through the comments and seeing a dozen people admit the same thing you felt in your quietest moments. Suddenly, you're not isolated. You're connected, not because of drama or noise, but because of shared truth. That's the kind of dialogue that actually matters. So don't just passively listen. Join in. Share a memory, a moment, a thought. Maybe it was that time you quit a job because the environment was toxic. Maybe it was when you stopped answering group chats that only gossip. Or maybe it was something as simple as turning your phone off for a day and realizing how freeing it felt. Whatever it is, it's worth speaking. Because silence has power, but so does expression when it's honest. So tell me, have you ever felt the urge to step back from society's noise? Drop it in the comments. Your story might be the exact words someone else needs to feel less alone. Closing reflection. Here's the truth: disappearing isn't about escaping life. It isn't running away, and it isn't giving up. It's about making space to actually live it. Spiritually awake, people understand that life isn't found in constant motion, endless debates, or trying to keep up with everyone else's expectations. Life is found in the pauses, in the stillness, in the spaces where you finally hear your own voice again. When they step back, it isn't because they're lost, it's because they've finally found themselves. They've realized that presence isn't measured by how loud you are in a room, but by how deeply you're connected to yourself and to the world in quiet ways. And that's a kind of strength most people never discover because they're too busy running to notice they're going nowhere. Think of it like walking into a forest. At first it feels silent, maybe even lonely, but if you stay long enough, you start to notice the layers, the rustle of leaves, the sound of a bird in the distance, the rhythm of your own breath. That's what disappearing does. It strips away the noise so you can hear the truth of your own life. And maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of disappearing we all need to try. Not to escape, but to return to ourselves, to our peace, to the things that actually matter. Because when you come back from that silence, you don't return the same. You return clearer, lighter, stronger. And sometimes the most powerful way to show up for the world is to first step away from it.